Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. My name is Nicole Duncan. I'm the editor of FSR Magazine, which covers the full service side of the restaurant industry. We teamed up with the CIA back in our May issue to do a special report on Plant-Forward and how it's affecting the full service restaurant space. I'm very happy to welcome two of the brands featured in that report. Robert McCormick is the brand chef at True Food Kitchen. And then we also have Michael Dean, who is the COO of JINYA Ramen Bar. So I want to welcome them out here. Hi, Robert.
Cool. Happy to be here.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, welcome. Thank you, appreciate it.
So we've kind of talked a little backstage before the session started, not just about the weather, but also about kind of the brand growth. Both are not just independents, which I think in the past we've seen more plant-forward adoption with. So just to start off, I thought I could maybe ask both of you about what the opportunities are and what are some of the challenges in terms of scaling your brands.
Yeah, I can go first. I think the biggest one for us is, we have 33 units across the U.S., and a lot of that is kind of stabilized in the Southwest, and then we're kind of growing more so in the central regions and East Coast. So supply chain is our biggest challenge in those newer markets where we're not fully established just yet. And couple that with some interesting proprietary ingredients that we have, and really kind of pushing from a supply chain standpoint, but also just new markets that aren't really familiar with us too, and getting those sales sort of going straight away in the newer markets. So I would say if there was one thing I'd have to point to, it would be just kind of getting those ingredients in our restaurants, and then really showing the story and sharing what those ingredients are with our guests.
Yeah, I don't want to be too repetitive because I think Robert hit it dead on there. Is we have the same, one of the major opportunities we have as we grow across the U.S. and Canada. We have a few locations in Canada is supply chain. That's one of the biggest projects we have going on right now, national distribution, and then we have some proprietary items as well. So having, with our cuisine being primarily Japanese focused, not always are those ingredients available in the U.S. So we have a supply chain of trying to get some of those ingredients from outside the country as well. And so, the impact of COVID and some of the transportation and distribution pieces have definitely impacted that. But I think the other part that Robert was talking about is just brand recognition. Again, I think people know, for us specifically, people know ramen in general, but most Americans' perspective of ramen is different than what we're serving, right? It's not out of the package and you add some salt and pepper. So trying to help them see and understand a broader perspective of the Japanese cuisine we provide.
I think it's getting a little bit better though. I mean, if you see in the retail space, you can go into any given Whole Foods or Sprouts or some of these little smaller specialty sort of markets, and there's a ton more variety now than there was even 5 or 6 years ago with some of these interesting ingredients. You can walk into one of those stores and get kuzu root or white soy sauce and things like that you couldn't have found that even just a couple of years ago. So I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just the pandemic has definitely thrown a little monkey wrench into some of that.
And I see we have already a question from folks, so I'm going to bring Jean Stevens on stage if she'd like to ask her question directly. Hi, Jean.
Hi,
Jean.
you guys. I'm actually just listening in. Thanks for allowing me in. Just checking, listening to some of the conversations about where you're at on supply chain and all the rest of it. I don't have a particular question, Miss Nicole. Just wanted to be a part of this and listen in on the case studies in change management. So it was a very appealing topic for me. So no direct question, but I do appreciate you allowing me in to listen.
Of course,
Thanks,
of
Jean.
course. I'm going to take you off stage, but you'll still be watching us. Okay. So I know you were both talking about the evolving kind of consumer, what they're leaning towards. And I was wondering, you're both relatively young concepts, not to say it's like fresh out of the gate, but you were established with a time when Americans were starting to be more interested and a little bit more daring in terms of the foods they seek out. Would you say that this whole emphasis on fresh plant-based ingredients, was that baked into the brand from the beginning, or has that been something that has also kind of evolved in time with the consumer itself?
For us, it's kind of both. I mean, it's definitely baked in. The restaurant, True Food Kitchen, was founded by Dr. Andy Weil about 12 years ago. So, and kind of the guardrails for our R&D and what goes on the menu is his anti-inflammatory diet, which is largely based on the Mediterranean diet and kind of seasoned with some different Asian influence and stuff as well. So it is largely, kind of based on fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes, healthy fats, fish, limited, proteins as well, clean proteins and things like that. But at the same time, that's even just in the last couple of years, that's kind of like the new thing that everyone's doing. And so we're trying to find ways to continue that evolution and really sort of up the ante a little bit more with some of our plant-based offerings and things, and continue to kind of lead the pack when it comes to that. So.
Yeah, I think we have had a little bit of a similar experience. Obviously, different backgrounds, but hearing that you have some Mediterranean focus, I have some of that experience previously as well. In the Japanese cuisine, and we're fortunate enough to have the founder and owner still as the CEO, so Tomonori, who founded the company and actually founded originally in Japan and then brought the concept to the US, which was kind of a childhood dream for us. But what he realized is where the pork base, the tonkatsu, is the more traditional base within Japan. And obviously that was primarily what was carried to the US early on. He noticed there wasn't a lot of vegetable base, so he developed that early on. And that was an important part of the concept initially. And then as time developed, the fad, well, not even the fad, but the emphasis on this healthier diet and more vegetables and cleaner eating became stronger and stronger. And obviously, places like LA and I know, Phoenix and other various regions are very focused on that. So you kind of lead the trend, so it makes sense in those brands where they're beginning. But from a Japanese perspective too, it's similar in a sense with the Mediterranean, where the meal is not always focused on the protein. The protein is kind of the addition too, whereas more typical American eating is based on the protein, and then you add some potatoes around it or something.
Yeah, and that kind of was one of the other things I wanted to ask you two about, because obviously very much JINYA is rooted in Japanese cuisine. There's Mediterranean and True Food Kitchen, but also some kind of different Asian influences. Is there something kind of inherently more plant-forward about these global cuisines compared to what the square American diet is, or is it just maybe more of a something that we've gotten away from in our eating habits and are now returning to?
Go ahead and take this one first, Michael.
This was right up your alley. Yeah. I appreciate it. I mean, I think probably Robert sounds like he's a much better expert on this with his background and even the True Food background. But I've tried to study international cuisines a little, just free time, nothing like I'm going to be a PhD on it, but I think that point is exactly right. The American diet, over the last probably really century, has evolved more and more into protein-based, heavy, large portions. And I would say, in general, internationally, it's usually the opposite to that. Again, I know a little bit about Mediterranean food and cooking and things like that. I think Robert has much deeper background, but that is a strong emphasis, right? To have you really focused on what was available. So seasonal fruits and vegetables and, lighter proteins like fish and things like that, more balanced in that approach. That's some of the things that we've tried to do too. So we have 4 seasonal chef specials, and we try to really focus those seasons around what are the ingredients, in play then, and how does that play into our cuisine. And I think with many restaurants, there's a lot of infusion going on. So you try to mix in other cultural fusions with that, with your ingredients and with your prime product. So.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that other cultures kind of have more variety of fresh foods potentially, and that's a broad statement, but I feel like in the U.S. we have so many choices that it's overwhelming, and we tend to, because of that, just go into kind of what we always know and what we always trust. So it's almost like other cultures that have less to pick from really end up having a more diverse, diet in general. It seems counterintuitive, but I feel like that's really, they, like Michael said, they have a limited sort of scope of things that they can eat and draw from. It's much more localized. Where in the U.S. we just have a little bit of everything here. One, because it's a multicultural country, but it's just so much variety in any given shopping center or grocery store. You can find any kind of different cultural food anywhere. So there's this, but we end up going to the things, especially in a time like this, that we're comfortable with. And if you go back to like March or April of this year, you couldn't find a package of factory farm chicken anywhere in any grocery store. It was just like everyone's just or pasta or any of those sort of staples that we just kind of gravitate to. And so I think by having so much variety, it just we end up eating the same old thing more often than not.
And speaking of chicken, it's interesting that at least we've been observing at the magazine, there have been these kind of opposite forces in terms of plant forward as COVID's unfolded, where on one hand you have consumers seeking out comfort foods, which traditionally often involve fewer plant ingredients and more kind of animal proteins or just kind of the more rich options. At the same time, we've had supply chain disruptions that have made people maybe more open to trying certain kind of plant forward or plant-based dishes. But looking farther ahead, do you see there being a lasting impact both at your brands, but then also in terms of the broader plant forward movement as a result of the pandemic? I know that's kind of asking to look into a crystal ball, but I didn't know if you all had some thoughts on that.
That's what we have to do every day anyway.
Yeah, exactly. True enough.
Yeah.
No, I think look, produce and vegetables are part of our DNA. It'll be like that for a while. I think if there's one thing this has kind of allowed us to do is to be a little bit more nimble with our menu changes. So we're not printing menus as much as we used to. It's, with QR codes and things like that, you don't have to have all these strict printing timelines and R&D timelines and things like that. So we're allowed to really be agile with that. So for example, next Wednesday, we're rolling out sort of this trilogy of heirloom tomato dishes, a tomato watermelon salad, a tomato soup, and an heirloom tomato flatbread. So it's to really celebrate in the month of August and September when tomatoes are sort of at their height, celebrate those ingredients while they are that good and really just kind of tell the story about it. And what is an heirloom tomato? The average consumer just kind of sees that as like a buzzword, and to kind of like highlight why this is a special ingredient and why we're, putting 3 dishes on the menu that contain that for this short amount of time. So just things like that, I think we'll kind of continue to do. So it's been actually a benefit for us to be more agile because of all this.
Yeah, those sound delicious, by the way. Tomatoes are probably my favorite. So, I think those that are kind of thriving and really navigating through this issue now with all this is going on with the pandemic are those that, to Robert's point, are becoming more agile. And I think a customer base that I've seen is that guests are much more open to things not being maybe in the same way it was before. This menu specific way and service in a specific manner. There's a lot more, I think, leniency to what restaurants are doing, which gives everybody, I think, a little bit more leeway to try new things and be more just be more open. I have a pretty long background, I would say, when it comes to plant-based. When I grew up, my grandparents were for religious reasons, were vegetarian. And so I experienced vegetarian food back in the early 80s, and it was obviously nothing like it is now. So if anybody had that experience back, I guess that's 40 so years ago, the food was not good. It was lack flavor, lack diversity. Yeah, you really, and I think people were really looked at kind of strangely at that time too, to have, to not eat meat. And it's progressed so much, and really over the last few years, even more so, where you have, the meat substitutes that are prevalent in almost all brands right now. So it's certainly something that has much broader appeal to people. I'll jump back just a little bit to the comments we were talking about before of people going back to some of those staples. I think when people are cooking at home, they go for what they're familiar with, what they can feel comfortable cooking, and oftentimes that's those traditional proteins or pastas. And they look towards brands like ours and many others out there to do the more advanced type of cuisine or ingredients, so that as things get locked down, they're dependent on themselves to make things that they feel comfortable making, right? So I think that might be some of that dichotomy that you see out there of strong traditional proteins, and then at the same time, the non-traditional path.
And we kind of started off looking at, and I think a lot of the questions have looked at the two brands kind of very at the macroscopic level. Drilling down, especially just what you were saying, Michael, about comfort foods are generally easier to cook. From an operational standpoint, I'm imagining that doing these very involved dishes is trickier than maybe cooking a steak or cooking something that is more animal protein based or dairy based. And granted, full service benefits from not having as quick throughput expectations from consumers, but at the same time, they are maybe not wanting to wait a long time. What are the challenges in developing recipes that you can have your kitchen staff replicate and at a relatively quick speed?
It's a lot of trial and error, for sure. Well, we kind of go through things. The first sort of lens is really flavor, creativity, and brand fit. Is this something that's really going to work at the restaurant? And then kind of whittle it down a little bit and make sure that the supply chain piece of it is set in. Does it make sense from a cost standpoint? Can we actually get this ingredient in on a consistent basis? And then it becomes the training piece. And that's been definitely more of a challenge, where typically we would fly in chefs to our headquarters here in Phoenix and train them in person the new dishes, and then they would fly back to their stores, and we do rollouts that way. Now, we rely on our regional chefs to sort of help facilitate the training, but we're filming videos of doing the actual dishes and highlighting those key points, in addition to recipes and different sorts of line builds and any sort of medium we can use to train the dishes. And then have the chefs taste the food over and over again is kind of what we're doing now. Our menu rollouts have scaled down in size, but there's more of them, so they're not so daunting. Whereas a year ago we may roll out 6 or 7 dishes in one shot for a fall seasonal change, whereas now we're rolling out 2 and then 2, and so it's the menu's able. We don't have to print menus every single time. We just have the digital sort of capabilities now, so that's been helpful. But yeah, it's tricky. All those things have just become a different way we approach the R&D piece of it now. And I think the other part is creating those dishes that actually have some consumer appeal. For example, we rolled out a jackfruit lettuce wrap that was sort of a Korean influence from the traditional japchae dish, which is like a sweet potato noodle with like a ginger, Asian-inspired sauce there. And we called it jackfruit japchae because it had kind of a nice ring to it. Well, the first 3 weeks on the menu with that name, it was a dud. And then we just changed it to something a little more approachable, a jackfruit lettuce wrap. Literally didn't change anything to the recipe. And people were, they're very excited about it now. And then we've done kind of a better job of telling the story of where jackfruit comes from and why it's good for you and the fiber content, and really laying it on thick with why these ingredients are special. So between the R&D, the training, and then the storytelling at the very end, it's a long process, but it's everything you have to do to kind of sell these newer-ish, dishes and ingredients to people now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about that educational piece, right? Is that's where some of these more plant-based or newer items, or maybe more unique ingredients, it takes a little bit more education process when it comes to either your servers or how you're explaining it on the menu, or even to Robert's point about, naming. You have to be careful with, how you name items that people can understand that. I had some Italian cuisine background, and even some of those, think about like a bolognese sauce versus calling it, red meat sauce or something, depending on which market you're in. Sometimes you have to make it very simple for people to really gravitate towards it.
For sure.
Yeah, so I do love, the point that Robert brought up about training and how different it is, because even if you have local restaurants, you really have to be careful about, going in and the amount of people you have next to each other and just how you're doing this. So I believe most people, trying to not speak too broadly, most people really learn from that visual aspect much better, especially depending on the makeup of the people you're trying to coach and teach, where reading may not be the easiest thing for them to really comprehend, and that step by step isn't the best way to coach. So having video and having, we've done QR codes in YouTube videos for new recipes and new rollouts. So I think it's difficult as it's been for restaurants. There's going to be a lot of good that comes out of it, as painful as it's going to be, but there's going to be a lot of good that comes out of it. How we, coach and teach people, and how we adapt to the business environment and cleanliness standards. I know we're not going down this path, but those are, I think, really important things, where restaurants, I think in general, have been pretty clean and pretty consistent about that. But to step it up is, in my opinion, I'm kind of a germaphobe. It's always important. And so I think there'll be a lot of benefits coming out of this. It's just really painful for people right now.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff now is like we're scratching our heads, like, why weren't we doing this for the last several years with a lot of video training and stuff? Because it's a resource that now every chef in the company has in their repertoire. They could just pull that out and reference it any time. Whereas an in-person training is definitely special, and it helps as well. But once it's over, it's over. So I think there's definitely, to Michael's point, it's been some good that's coming out of this.
For sure. I wanted to take a minute to open questions up to the audience. You can either request to come on stage with us or just ask them over in the corner. If not, I think that we could keep talking all afternoon and I can keep with the questions. But I'm sure there's some folks out there who would like to maybe ask Robert or Michael or both some questions.
Or maybe not.
Like I said, we can keep this conversation going. But if anyone does, I'm going to ask another one. But if you would like, while we're talking, to ask one, we'll get right back to you. So one thing I'm also curious about is, I very much as a consumer enjoy dishes that they don't have to be plant-based, but plant-forward. And I have no problem maybe paying for them what I would pay for an animal protein kind of heavy entree. But have you all come up against any kind of resilience there, where in terms of the cost of the ingredients and the preparation, the dish is priced fairly, but consumers assume, oh, this is all vegetables and fruits or grains. Why is it priced the same as some, like a burger would be or something like that? Have you had any resistance there?
Yeah, there's always a little bit of that. I think it goes back to telling the story a little bit more. We don't have all organic produce at True Food. We follow the environmental working group sort of Dirty Dozen, and not everyone's familiar with that. And what that is basically the dozen pieces of produce that typically have the most sort of herbicides and pesticides are used on them. We always buy all of that organic, and there's a handful of other, mostly leafy greens that we buy organic, and a lot of our dairy is organic. But it's a difficult story to tell when that list often changes a lot. So we try to let everyone know that there's definitely some value in the food, even though you can't maybe see it at face value. And we try to do that with all of our proteins too, and tell the story of where they come from and why we've chosen the specific salmon or the specific, grass-fed finished beef and those sorts of things. And then on an individual dish basis, really dive in through the social media channels and through the training with our service staff, why those dishes are special and the value there. And I think specifically with the service staff, which is definitely the challenging piece, because we kind of, even back to the R&D, when we're doing an R&D dish, when we're creating a new dish, it's like, I know if the store I'm working in and doing the dish, if the service staff is like fired up about it and they're interested into it, they're going to tell that story that we want to tell, that we want them to tell too. So that's kind of the first sell you have to make, is make sure the teams on the floor, your sales force essentially really knows and understands the dish, and they're able to kind of create the value. But it's not easy. It's an ongoing process. And I think that's probably another one of our opportunities going forward for everything new that we roll out.
I see we have a question. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Well, I was just going to play on what Robert's talking about with, the employees specifically, and that's what we're seeing with our brand when it comes to like the vegan selections. We have a huge following. It's obviously really strong within the community, but one of the early responses I got from almost every employee that we have, corporate and out in the restaurants, was how great our vegan options are. And so, to Robert's point, when you have brand advocates like that are so jacked up about it and selling it to guests and really excited about it, it really promotes that to the guests as well. But I think there's always that difficult balance of whether it's high level protein items or the healthier, safer options out there of clean and organic. You always have that balance of, is it priced right for what you're selling, and you can fix the guests, and it's better than your neighbors. So.
All right, I'm going to bring Greg Drescher, who's with the CIA, into our stage. Hi, Greg.
Hi there. How's everybody?
Greg, how are you?
Good. I have a question for the two of you. One of the things that I think fascinates me about our industry is how varied it is across sector. And so I would be curious, Michael and Robert, to what extent do you pay attention to other sectors in terms of what's going on in terms of trends? Or do you look primarily in your own sector? So for instance, do you follow what's going on in college, university, food service, who are going to be your future customers? Do you pay more attention to fine dining? Do you look at, where do you look for inspiration, or just sort of tracking trends outside of your sector, if you will?
You want to take it, Michael?
Sure. I still think this is a better one for you, but you can finish it off nicely. I think the brands that are kind of culinary forward, and I think both of ours are examples of. There's a ton out there. There's a lot of great, especially up and coming restaurant companies out there. I think those innovators and developers really look at what's going on more broadly, right? What's going, whether that could be like the home food service where the home meal kits, or it's, to your point, the next group of consumers coming in. We think that's an extremely viable avenue for us moving forward. One, we think our food specifically resonates with that group. We think, longer term, that becomes a great customer base moving forward. So I think it's important that you do have some balance of looking outside of just, your mainstay restaurant brands. That was one of the, I was in large brands most of my career, and that was one of the main reasons I wanted to get out and try to do something a little bit different, is that the large brand, and I'm not trying to be, talk bad about, I just think the large brands tend to look very similar across the board. You have the same rough appetizers and entrees, and they're slightly differentiated, but there's no real separation.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, my background is largely fine dining, Daniel Boulud in New York City, and a lot of those chefs that I still continue to follow and look for inspiration. But with True Food, we get compared a lot to different fast casual brands too, because of the vibe of the restaurants, a little bit more casual, and specifically for lunch, we kind of have a little bit more of a fast casual vibe. It's a full service restaurant. You sit down and go through the whole steps of service, but so we're always looking at what's happening in that sector too, and then but in general, for like new ideas or innovation, it's getting out to independent restaurants and tasting food that like chefs that own and run kitchens and businesses are really like fully inspired and totally committed to their restaurant. And that's where I feel like you're going to get more flavor, more authenticity, and know what's going on there.
I'm going to have to interrupt and wrap it up. We're going to be going to a networking break. But I want to thank you so much, Nicole and Robert and Michael, for a great session. Robert, I know we'll be seeing you main stage a little bit later, so we look forward to that. And again, thank you all so much for your time today.
Thank you all. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Take care.
Bye-bye. We are now going to our networking break. And as Jackie mentioned, you can use the tabs on the left of your screen to check out a range of ways to engage with everyone who is attending today, from your peers and suppliers to the presenters with our one-on-one networking. We also have a virtual Meet the Author booth in our expo area with Walter Willett. And you can purchase his book, Eat, Drink, and Be Healthy, a Harvard Medical School Guide to Healthy Eating. You can also visit our Expo tab to visit with our generous sponsors who are making it possible to offer this program tuition-free. The booths will feature special presentations and videos, live demos, interactive small group discussions, and more. And this slideshow here will show you this week's featured sponsors, as well as their themed programming. This will change week to week, so we hope that you'll check in there often to gain a variety of new insights. And don't forget, you're all entered into a raffle for each activity you engage in. And if you attend and participate in all 6 weeks, you'll have the chance to win a free registration and travel to next year's Menus of Change conference. We will be resuming programming on the Stage tab at 11:40 Pacific, 2:40 Eastern, for a look into healthy protective foods for our immune system. So enjoy networking and the expo until then. Thank you.